What's up, everybody? How are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to revisit the Metroid Prime Trilogy Remasters. Oh, Metroid Prime Trilogy, wherefore art thou? That is something I've heard in my comment section the past couple of days, big time, because as we know, the Metroid Prime Trilogy, or remake, or remasters, or some form of port of those games to the Switch was not announced in last week's Nintendo Direct, which definitely made a lot of people sad. It made a lot of people angry, and it's one of the main things that seems to have made a lot of people feel very disappointed in that Nintendo Direct as a whole. And of course, that even goes beyond just the Metroid Prime games. I actually think more of people's ire was focused on the lack of the Zelda ports, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. But there was so much conversation this year. There was so much conversation the last couple of years, really. And especially in the months leading up to this Direct this past week, about Zelda ports and Metroid ports. And some folks who have been insiders in the past claimed with absolute certainty that these games were coming. They're happening this year. They were going to be shown in this Direct. And the fact that they weren't really threw people off and made people very upset. Ironically, myself, as the world's biggest Metroid fan, you guys know, and a huge Zelda fan, I actually did believe these leaks. I believed the things I heard behind the scenes and publicly stated as well. I thought, some of these games or all of these games were going to show up in this Direct, and they didn't. But despite being the world's biggest Metroid fan, I personally liked everything. Well, not everything. I liked so many other things in this Direct that I wasn't even upset about the lack of these ports because they were never truly real until Nintendo told us anyway, even though I believed what I heard. So I just saw all the other big announcements and I thought it was a really great Direct. But obviously the point of this conversation is these Metroid Prime games, right? The HD remaster of the full Metroid Prime trilogy, the full-on remake of just the original Metroid Prime with potential HD ports of 2 and 3 down the road. These have been the topic of conversation for a couple of years. The remake idea really popped up, I think, last year. Emily Rogers, I think, was the first person to put that idea out there, that she heard or knew that that was supposed to be happening. And then other folks started doubling down on that, right? Most notably, Jeff Grubb, Nate the Hate, a lot of these other folks really kind of feeling like, yes, this is going to be happening. Obviously, the lack of GameCube games showing up in the Nintendo Direct was also something people were disappointed with, and myself included. I don't know that I necessarily believed those were going to happen, but I certainly wanted them to, and it's sad that they didn't. Some other folks are still claiming that there's supposed to be GameCube love happening. We see no signs of that at this point, so who even knows? But again, bringing it back to Metroid and the rumors and leaks, we'll say, and people doubling down on these leaks that before 2022 was over, we were going to see a Metroid Prime remake or a Prime Trilogy HD port, and we have no sign of them at this point. And with only a few months to go, it's not impossible that they still squeeze out before the end of the year, but it sure feels like they're not happening, at least in 2022. And so that brings me to the main question and sort of thesis statement of this video, is after all this time, after all these years, after this last big push to this recent Direct and all of the hype and people like Jeff Grubb coming out on podcasts saying, I'm going to shave my head and my beard if they don't show up, I am that certain they're going to be there, is it finally time for us to just forget about the Metroid Prime Trilogy Remaster? It's certainly a hard thing for us to think about doing, right? Is forgetting about these games. But we might be at that point, and to be fair, years and years ago, I actually made a very similar kind of video conversation about, after, 3 or 4 Directs where it was rumored to show up, and this is going back to like 2018 or 2019, it continued to not show up because these rumors go back to 2017, and it didn't show up again, and I was like, that's it. I'm done even worrying about this Metroid Prime Trilogy Remaster. And again, that was probably 3 years ago. And in some ways that stayed true, and in some ways I kind of went back on that because I never really allowed myself to believe it was truly real until Nintendo confirmed it. But at the same time, as people who claim to be in the know talked about it over the past few years, I discussed it. I covered it on videos. I talked about how I still believed it could happen or should happen. But I never wanted to report it as something that was an actual fact. I never wanted to say, this person leaked it or believes it, so it is going to happen. The closest thing I ever came to, even speaking about this last direct, was that I believed it was going to happen. But that was definitely because I believed these other folks who were so very confident. And obviously, they were wrong, and so obviously, I was wrong. And I can own it. While I never reported it as fact and discussed it as fact on my videos and my channel or on Twitter, I always did say I believed it, and I discussed it from the position of me believing it was true and was going to happen. I think it's fair to say I got just as duped as a lot of everyone else, and so I certainly will own my part of it in the sense that I talked about it like I believed it, because I did, and it turned out to not be true. And so that's where we get into this other part of this conversation about the leakers and the people who say that they just know something is going to happen, like these Metroid games or Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And with them not happening after these people were so sure, that's where we're seeing a lot of fans and gamers and Nintendo and Metroid fans really getting upset at these folks for putting this stuff out there and continually not being correct. I think it's a very tricky and somewhat nuanced situation we find ourselves in, because I know one or two of the folks who have been, very vocal about things that they've heard and that they believed and that they've leaked and whatnot in the past, and I think that a lot of the folks who are famous for doing this, again, Jeff Grubb is like, and this isn't even necessarily a call out because I'm not mad about any of this stuff. I have the Metroid Prime games on 3 different versions already anyway. Metroid Prime 4 is coming in the future. Dread came out last year. I'm not starving for Metroid content, and I own every Metroid game that exists anyway. I can play them. I don't need them on the Switch. But it is worth noting, I think Jeff Grubb sort of found himself as the main target of people's kind of frustration now after all of this happened, because he's the one who was on podcast saying I would shave my head and my beard. I believe in it that much. And that didn't happen. But the nuance of this is that a lot of these people definitely do and have known things in the past, including Jeff and including Nate and whatnot. So I think it's fair to say that there is a chance that what people have heard and the things that have come across my eyes, publicly and, of course, behind the scenes, are the things that make sense and might be things that Nintendo is planning or have been planning for even a very long time, potentially. But plans do change, so maybe these people knew information that was supposed to be true at one point and then changed and they didn't know it changed, and so all of their confident discussions about it end up seeming not true because Nintendo or any company moves things around. That is always possible. So that's where the nuance comes from. But I don't know that anyone is trying to purposefully deceive people by saying X game is going to show up at X time and I know it for sure. But it does certainly seem that way. And there is also a chance that these people are just wrong without knowing they're wrong. And so maybe Nintendo has been sitting here laughing at us for 5 years talking about the Prime Trilogy ports, knowing that they've never ever had the plan to do so. It's entirely possible that as much as we believe it, as much as we want it, as much as we've heard rumors and leaks and XYZ for 5 years about it, maybe it's never been a plan, and they're just sitting there watching the internet saying, what a bunch of dummies, they're making this up, we're not doing the Prime Trilogy. That could be the case. I still want to not believe that because it makes too much sense. It is easy money on the table for Nintendo. Same with the Zelda ports too. Just bring all of these games to the Switch in HD. They will make a killing, and Nintendo loves to do that stuff. So that's why it's hard for me to believe that there isn't a plan to release Prime games and Zelda games on the Switch. But it hasn't happened yet after 5 years of discussion and rumors, so I just think it's worth talking about the fact that maybe it truly has never been a plan, and maybe we've all been duped for 5 years. We might have to just face that reality, you guys. Now, it is worth noting that Nate, who is somebody, like I mentioned in a recent video too, I know fairly well. I've been on the Spawncast podcast with him many, many times in the past, and I do know that he does know things. He's got some accurate information most of the time, and he even actually recently, after this last direct where Metroid and Zelda games did not show up, he kind of doubled down on Retro working on Metroid Prime games. This is what he said when discussing what Retro has been working on since Donkey Kong back in 2014. He said this: after Tropical Freeze released, Retro started working on a new IP that was canceled, which was rumored for a while. He goes on to say the company then started working on Metroid Prime for the Switch, work finished on Prime Remaster in mid-2021, which was only last year. Now busy on Metroid Prime 4. So this paints a very interesting picture, you guys, because he's saying that they were working on a different IP, a new IP, which really should not have been canceled if that's true. We need new IPs, especially from a company like Retro. And that before they were apparently handed Metroid Prime 4 in 2019, instead of finishing that new IP, they actually started working on the Metroid Prime remake or remasters, whatever. Then we're given Metroid Prime 4, and maybe we're working on both at the same time. And the way he says it, and we don't know this is true. Again, I know Nate. I like Nate. He's a good guy who knows info, so I do want to trust him. But in a world where none of this is confirmed, we just have to remind ourselves of this. But what he's saying that he has heard and believes is that work already finished on the Prime Remaster last year, mid-2021, is a year ago from right now. And we don't know. He says Prime Remaster, so that could be just Prime 1. He could be referring to a Prime Trilogy. He says remaster, not remake, so it's all just as hazy as it's ever been. Really, there's never been a concrete statement about what people believe may or may not be happening with these games. Remake, remaster, full trilogy, Prime 1 only, who even freaking knows anymore? But whatever they were doing with old Prime games, Nate claims they finished a year ago from now, and that they're still continuing to crank away on Metroid Prime 4, which is the only thing we know for fact is happening, as silly as that may sound. So that's just where we sit on this, and I wanted to just point out that Nate did double down that apparently they do still exist. The Prime Trilogy or Prime Remake, whatever, apparently exists, apparently is even finished as of a year ago. And so if that's true, and I'm saying if, no disrespect to Nate, but again, we live in a world where nothing is confirmed. So if this is true, that means Nintendo might be sitting on a complete version of Metroid Prime or the trilogy. And maybe when folks like Jeff and Emily come out and say they know these things are happening and expect it to show up in this direct last week, maybe this is the same information they know, again, if it's even true. And that's why Jeff felt comfortable saying, I would shave my entire head because I know it's going to be revealed, because maybe he knows they're sitting on a completed version of these games. I mean, it's all possible, but it's also possible that none of it's real. So that is the nuance that I referred to earlier of this whole situation. And so for me, I know it's going to feel a little bit redundant based on the video I made a couple of years ago that I referenced earlier, but I think I need to do whatever 2022 version it is of myself to move on, quote unquote, from the Metroid Prime Trilogy situation. You know, I feel a little bit burned, I can't lie, just like the rest of the internet. I'm not mad about it, and I even still think these games very likely are real, despite, 27 rumors that they were going to be real, and 27 times they still have not ever shown up. Like I said, it just makes too much business sense for them to do it, and especially with the resurgence of Metroid right now, it makes even more sense. But, I mean, this felt like the time for so many reasons. We got everyone who seems to be in the know doubling down. We even have Nate doubling down after they were no-shows. But I just am like, I'm just kind of sick of it, I'm sure, I know you guys are too, and yes, I've been discussing these ideas myself, so even if we want to look at me as part of the problem, I'm willing to acknowledge it. I'm just a Metroid fan talking about Metroid games. That's what I do with my channel. Like I said, I never reported them as fact, but I discussed the rumors as the conversations were out there, and I said to you guys, I believed them. I certainly did say that, man. I own my part of that. But, I mean, what do we do now? What do? Do we just move on from them? I think I need to move on from them. Granted, you know what? I need to be careful, though, because I also reserve the right the next time there's a big conversation about people saying, I've heard they're coming next week. Let's be real. I'm going to discuss it. I'm going to share my thoughts and opinions on it on my channel. So maybe it's healthy for us to move on, so to speak, and stop expecting them. But I think we can still allow ourselves to be excited at the possibilities, right? Is that irresponsible for us to do as game fans and Metroid fans? Maybe, maybe not. But you know what? I kind of don't really care. I'm going to do what feels comfortable for me. So I'm moving on, but at the same time, just as ready to be excited whenever they might be real in the future as well. So do with that information what you will. I think the only last idea I'll add on at the end here is that there is that chance that maybe they didn't show up in the Direct, but Nintendo could do some surprise announcement of the Metroid Prime Trilogy or Prime 1 Remake as an independent thing. And in a couple of weeks, or maybe in October, they make a tweet and a YouTube video post, similar to what they did with, like, Paper Mario in 2020, where they're like, hey, here's the announcement of like a pretty significant, huge new game. And in this case, they would be ports of older games. But here's a Metroid Prime Trilogy HD remaster. We're going to tweet it out. We're going to put a trailer on YouTube. And it's coming out, you know, in November. And maybe in week 1 of October, they do it to release it in week 2 of November. So there's only 5 or 6 weeks between. And they can do that. And they can still get out these Metroid games before the year is over. Or even the Zelda games, if they just wanted to make the announcements separate from the Direct. It doesn't make sense because it would have been way more exciting and more headline grabbing if they included these games in the Direct. So it's hard to see that as a reality, but is it possible? Yes, it's possible. I don't want to leave you with this false hope at the end of this video, so I don't want to tell you to put all your chips on that happening, but it's just worth mentioning that as an option. Nintendo could be planning anything with these Metroid games or these Zelda games, or they could be planning nothing, you guys. We're just fans talking about things we think may happen, getting excited about the games and franchises we love, and that's what we're doing. And I'm a Metroid guy. You guys know it. That's why half of you come here anyway, and so these are just my feelings. Is it time to move on? Yeah, but can we still be excited in the future? Also, yeah. That's just how I feel about it. So that's it for today. Discuss what you think below. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next time on another video. Bye-bye.